everybody. There are people here I've not yet met, and so happy that you're with us. I'm Rabbi Marcia Tilchin, the founder of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County. We have a regular Monday morning learning group, which offers sort of a teacher a month with rotating scholars, and Bex is one of our favorite scholars, and we get to learn with her 2 or 3 times a year, and we're just thrilled that those of you who have found us either through Bex or through My Jewish Learning or other portals, we hope we're welcome to the Advanced Learning Institute family, and we hope that this will be not only a meaningful addition to your pre-Tisha B'Av planning, but also an expanse of your own Jewish learning menu. And take it away, Bex.
All right, thank you, Marcia. So I know most of you, I don't know all of you. Brief ground rules for the incredible learning we're going to do today and that we get to do together for the next few weeks. We're a big enough group that when you want to speak, I'm going to ask you to put your actual hand up or your Zoom hand up. And I would love to sit here and listen to what you have to say for 15 minutes and get a intense Chavruta experience with each of you. But there's too many of us for that. So when you speak, say what you got to say and get out. Drop the big revelation on us and keep it short, simple, pithy, 2 sentences and you're done. If you've got a thesis you want to share with us, the chat is a fantastic place for that, as are a number of academic journals. So that's one. And when you're not speaking, keep yourself on mute, please. 2, I haven't introduced myself to you. Most of you know me. If you don't know me, I'm Bex Stern Rosenblatt. I teach for the conservative yeshiva at the Fuchsberg Jerusalem Center. As you might guess from the title, that is in Jerusalem, but I'm their North American faculty in residence, which means I live in North America. And I do a lot of online teaching. I am happy for all of you to come learn with me all the time. I really enjoy teaching. I don't know what it is. So come learn with me. If you aren't already on my list, my email is on the source sheet, which I'll share right now in the chat. And one sec. And the Fuchsberg Jerusalem Center also offers all sorts of incredible in-person learning. If you aren't located in Jerusalem, it's a nice place. Go check it out. Come learn with us. Okay, and then third thing, as the North American faculty in residence, I also am the person who does a lot of the Shabbats in residence for the Fuchsberg Jerusalem Center. So if your synagogue or learning group or Hillel or whatever is looking for an engaging, wonderful teacher to bring, hello, lovely to meet you. I'd be glad. Email me. Okay. You ready?
We are ready. And Marcia, I just want you to know at the end of class today, I'd love for you to talk about your Haftarah class that you're teaching now. So make sure that everybody knows that that's going on as well. Okay, here we go.
Awesome. So I'm going to talk at you for 5 minutes to set up the stage, and then we're going to jump into the sources. So what we're going to be reading over the next few weeks is Eicha Raba, Petichta 24. Eicha Raba is a Midrash on the Book of Lamentations. And we're going to start off today with the Book of Lamentations itself. Y'all familiar? Hands up if you're familiar with Book of Lamentations, if you've taken that class with me, if you read it on Tisha B'Av every year, you've been around this block. All right, very nice. So I'm going to give you a very short introduction. If we were in person and I wasn't pregnant, I'd do this standing on one foot, but anyway, so Book of Lamentations is written in response to the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem. And it's the unthinkable has happened. This is absolutely the worst of the worst. This is something that we literally did not think was possible. Our city has been laid siege to, our country has been invaded, our neighbors and our families have been slaughtered. We've starved so badly that we've lost what it means to be human. We're at the point, and this is one of the most horrible lines in the Book of Lamentations. We're at the point where what it means to be a merciful mother is to kill and eat your own children because it's better than having them die of starvation. It's really, really, this is bad stuff. And we have been sent away from our homeland into exile, Jerusalem destroyed. And this raises big theological questions about how is this possible? How could God let this happen? Why did God let this happen? And you'll note in the book of Eicha, in the Book of Lamentations, 4 out of the 5 chapters begin with this question, with this how, alas, this like fundamental guttural cry, saying this is like, I don't understand. How is this possible? Eicha. And the Book of Lamentations sort of attempts a response. The Book of Lamentations mostly, though, is reaching out to God, saying, like, explain this to me. Make sense of this, because this is not right. What has happened to me, to my city, to my people, to Jerusalem, to my children is not right, God. And you got some explaining to do. You've got to make sense of this for me. Now, the big theological step that Lamentations takes is it says, okay, rather than it being the enemies who've done this to me, rather than it being the Babylonians, it's God. God has done this to me. And what that means is this is on purpose. God still exists. God wasn't killed off when they killed the temple in Jerusalem. When they destroyed God's home, they didn't also destroy God. So God still exists. God has done this to me. And God, if you're the one who's done this to me, you've got some answering to do. Now, Book of Lamentations goes on for 5 chapters of like gut-wrenching questioning, gut-wrenching soul searching, but God doesn't answer. God does not reply in the Book of Lamentations. Instead, we get the personified lady Jerusalem, personified woman Jerusalem, crying out to God, and we get different groups of the community of the remainder of Israel crying out to God. God doesn't respond. So that's Lamentations, that's Eicha, and we read it every year on Tisha B'Av. I'm going to take you through the source sheet now, just the books, just the bit from Lamentations, and then we'll stop and talk about Midrash a little bit, and then jump into the Midrash because it is so good. So I've given you, the name of this class is Teaching God to Cry. And I've given you from the Book of Lamentations some of the plentiful quotes about crying. Just a tiny bit of context for that. One of the ways that Jerusalem was destroyed is by burning. Jerusalem was laid siege to. We starved, literally starved to death for a year. And then once they eventually were able to conquer us, they burned our city down. And so this idea of tears, this idea of crying is partially this idea of like creating water to put out the fire, creating water to quench the anger of God, the fiery anger of God. So we're going to read these little bit from Lamentations 1-3, and you'll see that some of the text is in normal font and some of the text is in italics. The way I read Lamentations, the bit that's in italics is Jerusalem speaking, and the bit that is in normal text is a speaker speaking in dialogue. with Jerusalem. We're going to read this in English, and then we'll go back and forth with the Hebrew a little bit. Unless, Marcia, are you up for chanting some of this for us?
I'd be happy to. What do you want to hear?
I want to hear just verses 1 and 2 chanted, so we get the gravitas of it.
Okay, do the best I can. Eicha Yoshva vadad ha'ir rabati am haita ka'almana rabati vagoyim sarati ba'medinot haita lamas bachu tivken balayla v'dimata al lecheya ein la menachem mikol ohaveha kol re'eha vagduva hayula la'oivim.
Oh, Marcia, I've got to stop asking you to chant because I'm going to start crying during class. Oh my. Wow. Lauren, this is destruction of the first temple we're talking about that the Book of Lamentations is written in response to. The Midrash will talk about the destruction of the second temple in a minute. All right. Can I get, I need 2 English readers, one person to read the normal font and one person to read the italics. So a speaker and a Lady Jerusalem reading this whole first box, first page. Where are my readers? Who wants to read? Stuart, thank you. Stuart, speaker and personified Lady Jerusalem in the italics. Who have we got?
Marcia, you should do it.
Happy to.
Awesome, thank you. Go for it, Stuart.
Alas, how can the city sit alone? Once great with people, she has become like a widow. Once great among nations, princess among provinces, she has become a slave. She weeps and weeps at night, her tears upon her cheeks. There is no one to comfort her among all her lovers. All her friends betrayed her. They have become her enemies.
Is it nothing to you, all who pass this way? Behold and see. Is there pain like my pain that was dealt out to me, with which Hashem has made me suffer on this day of his great anger? For these I am weeping, my eye falls with water. My eyes are finished by tears, my insides churn.
Let tears fall down like a river, night and day. Do not give yourself to numbness. Do not let your eyes be silent. My eyes fall down with a stream of water over the destruction of my people.
Amazing. Thank you, Marcia. Marcia. Thank you, Stuart. All right. So this is just a tiny, tiny selection of the tears, of the crying in Eicha, in the Book of Lamentations. My question for you is, what are the tears doing here? What's crying? Why are we crying? What's the purpose of crying? How does crying function in the Book of Lamentations? Why do we have this dialogue? What story is being told from the beginning of the quotes I gave you to the end? What's crying doing here? How do you understand the progression of crying here in the Book of Lamentations? And just the reminder, I want your 2-sentence, get the answer. I want your in and out, and put your theses in the chat. So what is crying doing here? How do you understand the progression of crying in Lamentations? How do you understand the purpose of tears? Stuart, take us away.
Well, this is a sheer guess on my part, but there seems to be a flood of tears going on here, and maybe the flood evokes remembrance of the original flood where God, flooded the earth and wiped out all life from the face of the earth, because it feels like that in Jerusalem. God has just wiped out the whole kit and caboodle.
Ooh, awesome, awesome. So like tears as this water source, tears as this destruction and renewal almost. Cool. Okay. Other thoughts? Tears, what story is being told? What's the progression with crying here in Lamentations? You all don't know each other yet, but I know most of you, and y'all are nice. No one's going to judge you when you say the brilliant, slightly ridiculous thing. Thoughts. Yeah, Rhea.
So this is not anger. So there's two reactions to being deserted and left alone, and say famine and all the horrible things. There's one that would be anger, and the other one is bereft and sorrow. So this is the feeling of being deserted, left alone, and there isn't enough within the city as a personification to feel anger. It is really just wrung out.
Ooh, nice. Okay, so this Eicha, this how. One way to read that is complaint, is judgment, is blame, and another way to read that is devastation. And here, the tears are the devastation. The tears are the like pouring your heart out until there's nothing left. This like elemental response. Cool. Yeah, Rosalie. Oh, make sure you unmute. Rosalie, you're still on mute. Never mind. Retreat. Okay. Other thoughts? Marcia.
It seems to me that there's weeping for the person and weeping for the state, that there's like two levels at least of misery and mourning and sadness that's overwhelming. One is for me, I'm the individual, my world has just fallen apart, and the other is for the institution of the temple and the government of the people, which now means nothing.
Ooh, awesome. Okay, so we're taking this as Rhea was saying, this like in this elemental response to tragedy and transforming it into something that has purpose almost on a national level. Taking my devastation and making it our collective devastation, our collective mourning, which in some ways makes us still exist as a collective, unites us still as a nation. Really cool. All right.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Rosalie, you're back.
Yeah, I had gone to the chat to see it and I couldn't get back. What I don't understand is that in every society, there are always people that help, even if they're not like you. And I don't understand that they are so left alone with no kindness whatsoever on anyone else's part living there, or at least it's not showing itself. We help each other where we can.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that is so devastating about the Book of Lamentations, is it's describing the destruction that happens as a complete breakdown of society. That the figure described in the Book of Lamentations is described as a widow. We know as a society, we have responsibilities to the widow. We have responsibilities to the orphan. And yet, because our society is totally broken down, we are incapable of fulfilling those responsibilities that make us human. And what's more, we've so lost. Yeah, I mean, we always get back to the Shoah when we talk about the Book of Lamentations. We've so lost
Right.
our humanity that we have moms killing their own kids out of mercy. Like, this is the point at which you're not thinking about sharing your crust of bread with your neighbor. You're thinking you've been reduced to this almost animal state. Now, the Book of Lamentations is with you though, Rosalie. So that's the state we're in. The Book of Lamentations has this beautiful dialogue between a speaker and personified Lady Jerusalem. And what you see over the course of the dialogue, even just here in the little bit that Stuart and Marcia read, is the speaker is separate, describing this thing that happened to this other person, right? It's like, hey, look at her over there crying. And then over the course of the dialogue, he becomes like her. He weeps with her. He sits down on the floor with personified Lady Jerusalem and cries with her. And that's, I mean, as we go forward to Tisha B'Av, that's what we're doing. We're entering into Jerusalem's grief. We're becoming like her. We're becoming someone who can mourn with her. All right, y'all, I'm so bad at time management. So really quick, Yehudi, and then Lauren, and then I'm going to talk about Midrash.
I just like to point out that the word bachal, to cry, is only found twice in Megillat Eicha, which is exactly the same number of times that it's found in Megillat Ruth. What Megillat Eicha does is throw in a whole pile of other words which have a symbolic meaning of crying, but actually don't mean that, like Azel Yada Beli Benu, or Kumi Roni Balayla, or a whole pile of other, statements which convey the idea of heartbreak, but don't actually use the Hebrew words that normally accompany the idea of crying. So I'm not so sure that we should emphasize the physical emotion of crying that's visible, and the tears that are also visible. I think we should also think in terms of a whole pile of other, almost cascade of other emotions of unhappiness that are basically being spoken of here.
Fantastic, thank you, Yehudi. Yeah, the word for crying doesn't get used that often. We do have this repeating eyes flowing, this torrent, all these water words with tears coming from the eyes. As who was it who was talking about the flood said that there's this Stuart, there's this surplus of water in Eicha. There's this surplus of crying, even if we're not using the word for cry. There's also something really interesting going on with the difference between livkot and litzok, to cry out, which gets us back to the anger, but we're not going to go into that now because we've got Midrash to get to. Today, Yehudi. Lauren.
I was struck by this, do not give yourself a numbness. Emotions have evolution, and you start with loss, but you eventually come through that. And I think maybe this is a clarion call to acknowledge what's happened, but not to forget what the future may hold, which is an action to move forward. Maybe that's a little bit premature here, but don't forget your numbness is a sort of a chauffeur call.
Awesome. Thank you, Stu. All right, so there's this progression. There's this story being told by tears in Lamentations 1-3, where Jerusalem's crying, speaker's like, yeah, look at her, she's crying, and she cries herself out. She cries and she cries and she cries until she has no more tears with which to cry. And then the speaker comes, and we see that in the line in verse 11. My eyes are finished by tears. my insides churn. I mean, that's an incredible image. My eyes are finished, they're kalu by tears. There's like, I literally don't have eyes anymore because I'm crying so much. And then the speaker responds to her saying, do not give yourself to numbness. Do not let your eyes be silent. This call to keep crying. And we see there this transformation that Marcia is talking about, this transformation from your individual grief to our collective grief, to your tears have purpose. This isn't just to express the fact that you're sad, the fact that horrible things have happened. This is you are crying together with everyone else. You are crying for a purpose. You're crying in order to achieve something. And that you've got to keep crying, even when you're devastated, even when you think you have nothing left to give. And that in some ways, it's this act of continuing to cry that brings back your humanity that Rosalie was talking about. This transformation where it's like, if you've lost everything, if you've lost your humanity, if you become that animal, crying, acknowledging that this is not right, this is not normal, this is something worth crying crying for, is a way of holding on to your humanity. Yifei. Okay. So that's Book of Lamentations in a very short nutshell. Response to destruction of Jerusalem. We cry a lot first as individuals, then we use the crying to become a nation, hoping for something better. The crying is in some ways a symbol of hope, the symbol of return, the symbol of putting out the fire. Yefei. So we're going to move now to Midrash. Midrash is written somewhere between 400 to 1,000 years after the Book of Lamentations is written. And that's where it's written in stages, so it's not written all at once. It's written after the second temple has been destroyed. It's written after we have totally lost control of the Yehud, after we've totally lost control of the land of Israel. The difference is the first time it happened, when the temple was destroyed, it was a one-time event, right? It was okay, this has happened, unthinkable has happened, but it's only happened once and we can long for redemption. By the time that the Midrash is written, it's happened again and again and again. We keep being defeated. Even when we get our land back, we're defeated again. And so what in the Book of Lamentations seemed like a singular event now seems like the story of Jewish history. Seems like the way we exist as Jews is we go into the land of Israel, we do bad stuff, and we get exiled. And that we're stuck in this cycle where we are continually going to be destroyed and exiled. Now, this is a huge theological problem, right? Like, God promised us the land, and yet we continue having this horrible stuff happen to us. We need to make sense of it. We need to create a new theology that allows us to contend with a God who is going to enact horrible destruction on us again and again. So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be reading bits of Petichta 24 together, which is one way of answering this question, or offers a couple of ways of answering this question. The big innovation of Eicha Raba, of the Midrash on Lamentations, is it gives God a voice. God did not speak in the Book of Lamentations. God is going to be speaking and speaking and speaking, Moses in the Deuteronomy style, in the Midrash. So we're gonna Oh, I gotta say also just a very quick word on the idea of a petichta. Anybody know what a petichta is? Is that a familiar phrase? Cool. So Marcia is right. The root is liftoach, to open. And a petichta is a particular style of midrash where you start with a quote from somewhere random or somewhere fairly random in the Hebrew Bible, and you start with that quote and you end with the book you're talking about. So you make this like very elaborate series of connections from your opening quote to the book you're going to talk about. Petichta 24 is incredibly long. We're only doing selections from it, but all of the petichtas, all of the petichtaot for the Book of Lamentations, and there's 34 of them, all of them are ending with the very first verse of Lamentations. All of them are ending with Eicha. Eicha yashva v'dad ha'ir, which Marcia chanted for us so beautifully. All of them are ending with, how could the city sit alone? So in some way, that like as we read through Petichta 24, we're reading it as a commentary on this idea of how could the city sit alone. It's enlightening, it's providing enlightenment for us on that verse, on that phrase. Tov. So as we go through, you'll see there's a bunch of quotes from elsewhere in the Tanakh. If we had a semester to do this together, we would dive into each of those quotes and read them in context. I don't formally get to assign you homework. If I did, I would say, go look at those quotes, chase down those biblical quotes, read them in context, because they're going to illuminate for you a lot more meaning. We just don't have time to do that together. Okay. So would somebody, we're on the second page now. Would somebody read the first two boxes in English? Y'all, when did you become so silent? Do not give yourself to numbness. Stuart, you already read. Somebody ahead. Somebody else. Rhea, go for it.
Whoops, wait a second. I just did this. Okay. At that time, the enemies entered the temple and they burned it down. And because it was burned down, the Holy One, blessed be He, said, again, I have no dwelling place on earth. I will withdraw my Shekhinah from it, and I will go up to my original home. And you want me to read it? This, it was written in Hosea 5:15. Yep. I will go and return to my place until they have been punished and they request my presence.
Great. And one more box.
Oh, at that time, the Holy Blessed be He was weeping and saying, woe is me, what have I done? I made my Shekhinah dwell below for the sake of Israel, and now that they have sinned, I return to my first place. Heaven forbid that I become a laughingstock to the nations and a mockery to creation. Oh, that's the warning Moses gave God.
Awesome.
Right?
Awesome.
Yeah, okay. At that time,
good, okay. Stop. Okay. Thank you, Rhea. Okay, so we've got a ton going on here. What stands out? What's interesting? What catches you?
Well, catches me because there's not a single word in the whole Tanakh about God crying, and now they're trying to somehow introduce that theme, though it's totally absent from the Tanakh itself.
Great. Okay. Yeah. In the second box, all of a sudden we have Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One, boche, cries. That's not a Tanakh concept. That's something we're introducing from where? We've got to figure it out. Yefei. Okay. Sylvia and then Rhea.
It always kind of gobsmacks me that we read that the Holy One, blessed be He, sends Shekinah, which is the female aspect of God, as far as I know, to live below. And what does that say, one, about the theory of monotheism, and two, about what the female aspect of God is for? Which I don't know.
All right. A huge question, Sylvia. Incredible questions. I'm going to give a very, very short answer because there's like a course you could teach about that. The short answer that I'm going to point us to is that the Shekhinah is like, it's the dweller. It's not just the female aspect of God. It's also the aspect of God that does dwelling, that dwells on earth. One. Two, there's something really interesting about the woman Jerusalem, personified Lady Jerusalem in the Book of Lamentations, mirrored by the Shekhinah in the Midrash. Cool. All right. Raya.
Yeah, this is really interesting because about God's response to what will the people think of me? What about my reputation? And that is just, because I mentioned about Moses negotiating with God, and you can't destroy the people. What will the neighbors say? And so this is an aspect of God that is not in the line of aspects. One worried about what will, and so the assumption from that could be the concept of other gods will gain in reputation and our God will diminish in reputation. I don't know if that's an implication, but it could be.
An important distinction right now. And that distinction is between description and characterization. Description. This person is often not successful at what that person tries to do. Characterization. That guy is a loser. There's a big difference between those two. And part of what I want to get at today is to talk about how the names, whether they're literally names or characterizations, can support someone or destroy someone.
Great. Great.
My talk today is influenced by 3 books, and they are the following.
Yehudi,
Damaged Identities,
Yehudi,
Narrative
this is
Repair.
awesome, but I'm going to
Hilda
mute you for a
Nelson.
sec because this is a thesis. So it's an awesome thesis, but it should go in the chat. Okay. Thank you. Comments got to be short and pithy. Theses, which are awesome and I'm so excited to read, are for the chat. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, there's something incredibly interesting going on in this second box. Like Yehudi pointed out in his first comment, we find God crying for the first time. But as Raya is pointing out, the thing that like causes God to cry here is God's worry. God's worried that the other nations are going to think he's a laughingstock. He's a mockery to creation, right? Like he's not crying over destruction. He's not crying over the things that we just saw Jerusalem crying over. He's crying because he's like, oops, maybe this wasn't the right way to go about this, which is interesting. Do people, what's the theology in the first box, this first, and because it was burned down, the Holy One, blessed be He, said, I have no dwelling place, I will go to my original home. How's God understanding destruction there? Marcia?
It just reminds me back in Shemot where God says, build for me a mikdash and I will dwell among them. And now that there is no mikdash, God retreats from among the people.
Yefeh.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, heartbreak. And whose heart?
God's heart, obviously. God has no dwelling place among the people because of the destruction of the temple. They're two different things.
Great. Okay. Okay. Awesome. So we start off this first box saying the enemies burned the temple down. God's not saying I burned the temple down. God's saying the enemies burned it down. And now I can't dwell with you. And there's sadness there. What's more, the quote, the proof text we use, this Hosea 5:15, is saying, I will go and return to my place until they have been punished and they request my presence. That there's this theology of like, okay, it hurts me to go to withdraw, but I need to as a teaching tool almost until the nation requests me again. Yefeh. Okay, there's so much more here. Oh yeah, gosh, and this question of God being all powerful is huge, right? We're introducing a God who cries, the idea of a God who cries, and a God who and us as a people.
So with that, my colleague Bundy is going to
over
give us a tour, and throw it to her. Yep, there she is, out in the field. I feel like a reporter turning it over. So this is the first thing that you see as you begin.
Marcia, if you can mute the person who's talking right now, I can't find them. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, so where were we? So we're gonna keep moving. So we're gonna move to the next box where Metatron comes and speaks. Metatron is one of the angels, really interesting. And you can go read about him. I'm not going to go into that now for the sake of time, but Metatron, all you need to know is he's one of God's angels, shows up a lot in the Midrash. So God's crying, and at that time, Metatron came and fell on his face and said before him, Master of the universe, let me cry so that you do not cry. And God said to Metatron, if you do not let me cry now, I will go to a place that you have no right to enter, and I will cry there. Proof text, as it is said in Jeremiah 13:17, and if you do not listen, my innermost self will cry in the hidden place because of your arrogance. Yeah, Ellie. Oh, Ellie, make sure you unmute.
Yeah, I'm just wondering that if this is a lesson that God's given us, that it's okay to cry when something hurts us. And no matter what, the pain is so intense that we cannot withhold. And if we have an example of our father or our parents, that it's okay to cry as much as you can. You should do it because it's something that we need to do as human beings.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, we have Metatron saying like, oh God, don't cry. Oh, let me do that for you. And God says, no, I need to cry. And maybe the reason I need to cry is because I'm teaching you how to cry. I'm showing that it's okay to cry. Okay, cool. Definite possibility. I got you.
Two things. The first, it seems that God is not all powerful. If he depends, he oh wow of me, is vulnerable. And the other is the feeling, hard feeling when we see someone who we trust crying.
Great. Okay. So we have God being vulnerable, and for like thinking about the writers of this Midrash, like they're writing this story, right? This is not like the Tanakh, some people can think actually happened. The Midrash, you don't think it actually happened. This is a story we create. And we're choosing to create a story in which God is vulnerable. in which God is crying in order to do something. So we create this vulnerable God, this crying God, perhaps like Ellie was saying, to teach us that it's okay to cry. Yifei. And then cool. All right, Sylvia.
Perhaps that if we take the supposition that God is always with us and within us, when this all happens, he's so identified with us because we're part of him, he's part of us, so he's crying with us. It seems pretty simple.
Awesome. Okay, really cool. So that like all we had been wanting in the Book of Lamentations is for God to see us, for God to acknowledge us, for God to cry with us. And we get this response in the Midrash where God is doing just that. Okay, cool. Rhea, I didn't see what you just said. Rhea, yeah, we've got this concept of God withdrawing when God's creation goes amok, which comes back to what Gotchi is saying is maybe God's not all powerful, and all God can do when things go sour is retreat until God's called again. Yefei. Rochelle.
I think that possibly God is annoyed with the people because they're in such despair and they're giving up on God. When we could say, after every time something bad happens, I brought you out. Why all of a sudden don't you trust me to make it right again? And every time I go to Israel, I have a problem with Tisha B'Av.
Okay, cool. So what I was talking about with this this change in theology, now destruction isn't a one-time thing, destruction is a cycle. But what it means for destruction to be a cycle is redemption is also a cycle. That we can trust that having been destroyed, we will also be redeemed. So to have this like collapse response, it's like, no, like, haven't you read the Tanakh? Haven't you seen the story before? Like, it's gonna get better. I'm going to come back as soon as you call me. Like, how does the book of Exodus start? And they cried out and God heard them. And that's all we need here is to cry out. The question then is, what is God doing crying? Is God crying because we don't understand that? Why do we need God to cry? If is there another layer you can add to that? Answer to that question or additional thoughts about this Metatron book, Metatron box we just read. Yeah, Rosalind.
Sorry, crying is a human thing, which might be why God hasn't done it before, but it links God and human beings in a personal way that is possibly new.
Okay, great. So we're giving God this humanity, which is weird, which like demands explanation. Why? Like, there's something almost uncomfortable with the idea of a God who cries. Like Gotchi was getting at, like, this God is being vulnerable. This God isn't all powerful if God is crying. Like, surely if something's gonna make God sad, God could just not do it. God could go back and tinker a little bit, and like there's something incredibly weird about the image of God crying. Yefei. Okay, Nikki.
I think that I want to say this, which has changed a little bit. So in the third box there that we just looked at, we've got this God says to Metatron, if you do not let me cry, and they connect it to this, which is odd to me, like how's Metatron going to stop God from crying? Okay, I need your permission. I mean, it's God, right? But they take it to sort of retroactively read or index through Jeremiah, the verse, which is, if you do not listen, I'm going to be crying and crying and crying. And that's a whole different like power dynamic. That's the first thing. The second thing is the destruction of the temple. Even God is moved by this. And yes, it's terrifying to think that God is vulnerable or could cry, but we also have to withstand that and come through it like a catharsis of some kind. Like we have to be able to sit with God in God's vulnerability in a way, or it's like a strength, his crying. Okay, I'm done.
Incredible, Nikki. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So we have this question that we've come to about like, what is the point of God's tears? Why is God crying? Is God crying because God is vulnerable, because God is weak, because God is collapsing? Are God's tears meant to be some sort of lesson to us? And Nikki, you're saying, okay, well, we can use this quote from Jeremiah to get at why we see God crying. And this comes back to what Yehudi was talking about way back when. God cries expecting us to listen, it looks like, from Jeremiah, right? We're supposed to hear God's tears. We're supposed to witness God's tears, and that's supposed to invoke in us some sort of response. When we don't hear God crying, that's when God withdraws. So throwing it back to you, what are we supposed to do when we hear God's crying? What is the point of God's tears? Why does God cry expecting us to hear? What does it mean for God to have tears like that? It always brings me back to William Blake, Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. You know, when the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears. What are God's tears doing here? Stuart.
This reminds me of a game of hide and seek. And you see, God is maybe just so disappointed and downcast because it seems like he's hiding, but on the other hand, nobody is seeking him. And we've all had that experience, playing hide and seek. If nobody looks for you, it's very devastating, because it means nobody cares for you.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, my toddler is literally doing that in the other room right now. Yes. Yefé. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And there's fantastic. There's also this idea that I think, Nikki, you were getting at as well. God's tears, especially in Jeremiah, like God's tears are in some ways these prophets telling us to do better. Are God rebuking us and us not listening? Okay, I'm going to take us through super quick this last box. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to the ministering angels, and that's Malachei Hasheret, come and we will go and see my house, what the enemies have done to it. Immediately, the Holy One, blessed be he, and the ministering angels went down with Jeremiah before them. And because the Holy One, blessed be he, saw the temple, he said, surely this was my house, and this was my resting place. And the enemies came into it and did as they wanted. At that time, the Holy One, blessed be he, was crying and saying, woe is me, Oy li, for my temple. My children, where are you? My priests, where are you? My beloved ones, where are you? What can I do for you? Ma'e selechem. I warned you, and you did not turn back in repentance and tshuva. Okay. So, Diane, awesome. We've got God's tears as this shofar call, as this call for us to turn back in tshuva. Other thoughts about this box? It's very different from what we saw before, where God's tears were like, oh, what are the other nations going to think? hear what's happening. Why is God crying? What causes God's tears? Yeah, Lauren.
I'm not sure what the warning is. Can you explain that? When did he warn about this type of an incident? Is it just that there was not a following that prevented this from happening in the first place? I mean, that's kind of more philosophical than reality.
Fantastic. Okay, yeah, so this is this like general warning. And one of the cool things about Midrash is it's specifically supposed to be on the Book of Lamentations, but it's addressing the cyclic thing. That God has given us, the way Midrash is understanding like the cycle of history, the way time works, is we were given a rule book. We were given like a IKEA manual for how to behave. And that was the warning. That was the Torah. We were told how to behave. And every time we transgress Torah, we are not following that rule book. We are not following that warning. And yeah, Marcia, to that. It's not just Torah, the 5 books, the Chumash, it's the prophets giving warnings, it's the whole Tanakh, it's the whole oral Torah. It's anytime we've transgressed, like we knew better. God had given us revelation, we knew better, and yet here we are again, we're still in the cycle of destruction, redemption, destruction, redemption. Yefei. Oh God, Sylvia, really quick.
Well, yeah, I think his heart is broken because all of a sudden, I mean, we've gone through this again and again and again, but there's always been somebody around saying, yep, okay, we're doing the right thing, and he can come back. But nobody is even saying, oh my God, we're so sorry. What can we do? You know? So it's like he's lost everybody and everything. If you've ever lost everything, you know what that feels like.
Yefei. Awesome. Okay, so sit with this. There's so much more here. There's so much meaning you can make out of this. Compare these different boxes to each other. Compare God's response in each of them to each other. And then we will be back next week. I hope you join again, where God's going to realize his tears aren't cutting it. His tears aren't good enough. He doesn't really know how to cry. And he will call on 4 of our patriarchs to teach him how to cry, to do the crying for him.
Wow.
It's crazy. It is so cool. So I hope to see you then. Meanwhile, y'all have my email. If you have theses you want to share, if you have brilliant thoughts, I want to read them. And I will see y'all next week.
Thank you all for coming. And Marcia, do you want to just share a word about the class you're teaching right now that people might be interested in?
Sure, I'm going to put some information in the chat. We're doing 10 Haftorot in 8 weeks. That means the 3 Haftorot of rebuke and the 7 Haftorot of consolation. Originally, I thought I could also include the Haftarah for Tisha B'Av, but it is massive. So we're going to be looking at the personalities of Jeremiah and Isaiah, and it started last week, but if anybody is interested, my email is in the chat. If you send me email, I'll send you the link to the recording from last week. It is Thursdays, our time, Eastern time, it's at 7:30 in the evening. So California time, it's 4:30 in the afternoon. If you can make it, I would be thrilled to have you join us.
Thank you. Okay. Hope I'll see you Thursday, and have a great week, everybody.